We can start now with our 8th session, which will be held also in English. The topic is ethics against violence, activism, and research. We have 2 contributors, and now I give the floor to Jana Kuzunčić and Vanja Petrović toward abolition feminism in praxis. The case of Novi Sad Feminist Abolition Summer School.
Okay, thank you. Jana is not with us, so it's just me today. And I will talk about so I'm here to propose alternative frameworks and practices of transnational solidarity on the example of an abolition feminism summer school held in Novi Sad, Serbia in 2024 for the second year. The school came together as a response to the local carceral feminisms. Which are disengaged with the critique of the criminal punishment system and repressive state policies, drawing on the works of abolition feminist thinkers, activists, and researchers like Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and Mimi Kim. We wish to explore opposition to criminalization and policing in the former Yugoslav region. This approach has not yet been applied to our local context on a more systematic level, and we wish to investigate how we can deal with violence, nationalism, racism, war, and other related problems in our society through the application of principles of radical feminist concerns and theoretical and practical insights of abolitionist activists. Contemporary feminist history in the former Yugoslav countries has witnessed extensive organizing against domestic violence, starting in the late 1980s with SOS Telefoni. So feminist organizations have been operating domestic violence hotlines, women's shelters, and campaigning against sexual violence. The need to hone in on domestic violence is a key issue as a result of feminist organizing in the late 70s and 80s, which revealed that although Yugoslavia had been developing its centers for social work, institutional support for domestic violence survivors was insufficient. In spite of the fact that these efforts were grassroots in nature, they pinned their hopes on institutionalized carceral solutions. And so they campaigned for harsher sentences, more laws that would introduce new offenses and greater prosecution. In Serbia, women's organizations are involved in tracking the homicides of women by their domestic partners or others close to them. As we have already mentioned this in several previous presentations, I will not go into details here. In Croatia, the government recently announced new amendments to the criminal code, which include femicide as a separate criminal offense. This came about after many years of feminist and women's NGO lobbying for femicide to be recognized as a separate criminal offense. The reasoning behind this is that legally recognizing femicide demonstrates the political will required to acknowledge and legally address this social issue. Feminists like Dunja Bonači-Skenderović have created schematics and models for helping police profile potential murderers. And she claims that following certain parameters of patterns that she outlines, it's possible to prevent femicide institutionally, but this requires the recognition of coercive control by institutions. As Nina Trolović writes, Bonači-Skenderović concludes that the murder of women by partners can be prevented, partners and others can be prevented through more, quote, effective education of the police, courts, social workers on how to take a stricter approach towards those individuals who pose a threat to the family. Additionally, it establishes a foundation for promoting further expansion of the carceral state by criminalizing coercive control, despite existing criticism of its implementation in countries that have already criminalized coercive control. The issue here is that legal feminist theoreticians and especially abolition feminists have criticized the reliance on laws to solve social issues. As feminist scholar Carol Smart writes, quote, "The feminist movement, broadly defined, is too easily seduced by law. And even where it is critical of law, it often attempts to use law pragmatically in the hope that new law or more law might be better than the old law. Advocating for legal changes ultimately empowers the state without necessarily changing or altering social reality. Carceral logics have significantly influenced our post-conflict environment. The liberal assertion that the criminal justice system can effectively address social issues fails to recognize its complicity in state-sanctioned violence. This phenomenon has long been present in the Western Balkans. For decades, connections, and we've talked about this in previous presentations, so I won't go into it here, but basically in light of our local experiences of state capture and the rise of the alt-right and the coming of Trump to power again, we know that laws and regulations can always be worked around and manipulated by those with resources to the detriment of those without. So what we propose is that feminists should redirect their efforts towards building stronger communities, coalitions, and exploring transformative justice in the Balkan context. What has additionally been absent from mainstream feminist and women's organizing in the former Yugoslav countries is the understanding, as Lee Goodmark writes, that advocating for more law, more prosecution, and increased police presence strengthens the carceral system, which in turn will result in more women behind bars. Paradoxically, research into women's incarceration has established that most incarcerated women were survivors of sexual and domestic violence, and that the crime committed was at least partially caused by previous victimization. In turn, a more effective carceral system will produce more women in prison for crimes committed as a result of violence and abuse that the system is meant to prevent, but does not. As Jovanovic and Batricevic write, women in prison have already been immensely neglected and victimized prior to entering the prison gates. Furthermore, research consistently shows that higher incarceration rates are not associated with lower violent crime rates. Decades of mainstream feminist advocacy for harsher custodial penalties has not resulted in rape being any less prevalent in society, nor did it improve the experience of rape trials for victims, including satisfaction with verdicts. So in the Serbian context, women in prison make up just under 10% of the overall incarcerated population, and they're all housed in the Požarevac Correctional Institution. According to a 2024 study, the overall quality of life out of all prisons in Serbia was the worst for women in Požarevac. The same study showed that professionalism of prison employees was well below the threshold of acceptability. Until 2019, women were housed in a building that was built in the late 19th century and only renovated in the 70s, sleeping up to 18 in a room. They were not allowed to wash, it might not still be, we don't have the information, they're not allowed to wash their personal clothing in the washing machines, only their work clothing. And additionally, the workshops where the women were employed were only recently retrofitted with proper insulation. In Croatia, sentenced women were held in the only women's penitentiary, or are held, Požega, which has been operating since 1946. It was completely renovated in 2003 due to poor physical condition. Women comprise only 4 to 5% of the total number of people serving sentences in Croatia, and they're predominantly imprisoned for property crimes. Limited research into the experience of women imprisoned in Požega suggests that there are issues with room overcrowding, dilapidation of the building despite renovation, and the need for improved health-related services, such as a lack of an appropriate number of nurses and a lack of prison-based psychiatrists and dentists. Considering the state of women's prisons and penitentiaries in the region, alongside the nature of crimes committed by women, the lack of interest in decarceration, and prison abolition from women's organizing is troubling. We found each other through activist networks, united by our frustration with the current state of mainstream feminism in our respective contexts, informed by literature mainly stemming from the global north. We wanted to explore what abolition could look like for us locally. Mainstream feminisms, largely organized around NGOs, have advocated for harsher sentences. And we had wanted to explore what could be an alternative to that. Informed by critiques of the NGO industrial complex, anarcho-feminist theories, we wanted to come together in a grassroots collective rather than a formalized NGO structure. The capitalist devastation of our communities and the roles of NGOs as agents or close collaborators of the state made us wary of relying on a more formal structure. In our call for participants, we asked the following questions. How do we radically reimagine safety in the Balkans? What do relationships of care that prevent the death of people on the move on our borders look like? Can we end violence against women without harsher prison sentences? How do we find words to talk about racism that ultimately leads to disproportionate numbers of Roma people behind bars? Does police violence against LGBTIQ people and other minorities make us any safer? Sorry. The summer school was organized by a grassroots initiative. I already discussed this. The goal of the school was to open dialogue about imagining and creating a society that is not based on criminal policies, prisons, and the police, but on radically different principles of building relationships and establishing justice, with a special emphasis on the gender dimension and feminist ethics. The school was envisioned as a space for collaboration and collective effort. So we organized the first summer school in 2003 in collaboration with the Feminist Autonomous Center for Research from Athens. Možemo na sledeći onda. Okay, može sledeći slide, to sam sve prošla, nažalost, da. Okay. The first summer school was organized in 2003 in collaboration with FAC in Athens. We were one of 5 nodes taking place simultaneously in Athens, Berlin, Lisbon, New Delhi, and Palermo. The following year, FAC decided to take a year off from organizing, but the collective that had organized in the Novi Sad node decided to keep organizing a summer school, dealing with abolition feminism, specifically in the Balkans. The major change in direction that we took is focusing on the local context and exploring avenues for what abolition feminism could look like in the former Yugoslav space. It was hosted in Crna Kuća, which is one of the few alternative spaces left in the city in Novi Sad, and is currently engaged in a property rights struggle. Spaces that allow for radical political discourse are increasingly disappearing under neoliberal and authoritarian pressures. That Crna Kuća remains one of the few strongholds of such engagement in our city. Although we had a few lectures, we also had panel discussions on the feminist abolition of the criminal punishment system. We discussed how carceral logic is applied to policing in Serbia, particularly in relation to border enforcement along the Balkan route, and had a screening of the documentary Shadow Game, which was filmed by people on the move themselves, followed by a panel featuring persecuted human rights, anti-war, and other activists. On the third day, participants helped a Solidarity Kitchen prepare meals for 300 people, and we held a workshop exploring common feminist concerns, such as responses to sexual violence and intimate partner abuse in a transformative justice setting. We purposefully left lots of space for discussion, which proved to be the right decision, as we had the opportunity to collectively explore how gaps between feminist organizing for victims of domestic violence and abolitionist calls for prison abolition can be bridged. We were privileged to have several participants who have been active in helping domestic violence victims with us, which made discussion more effective. Many other burning issues came up, such as how to discuss informal Roma settlements. Our intention was to keep the final day light by focusing on a workshop. But as some of the participants had been attacked in the park the night before by a group of neo-Nazis shouting fascistic slogans, they were also followed to their hotel room by them. We opened with a check-in circle and provided space for those affected to process the incident and share their experiences if they wished. Although many of us had only recently met, both organizers and participants saw this moment as an opportunity to support those impacted by the violence and reflect on abolitionist approaches to responding to such attacks. One trans man who was one of the attacked wrote a piece about it for the publication we later put together. The summer school created a transnational network of solidarity among participants. The collective work made possible the creation of the publication, Abolition Feminist Perspectives in a Global Context, Dispatches from Novi Sad. This publication presents a tapestry of different works and perspectives from our participants. One participant is actually writing her master's thesis on abolition feminism as a result of the school. Another, who's an editor of a Croatian magazine, has been writing extensively about abolition feminism and applying some of its core principles to events in that country. I think these are some pictures here. This is what's open. Different ways that we thought about abolition feminism in the Balkan context. And this is where they were attacked in the park by neo-Nazis, and us talking about it later. It was an extremely difficult discussion to have. So,
Thank you very much also for the time, because it was in time.
oh, yeah.
And now we have our next participant, but I'm not sure that I will read this correctly. So please correct me if it is not okay. Sander Creed, Shyamika Jaya Sundara Smith, Sling Club, Rest Here Now, Rest an Embodied Creative Expression for Black Americans against the racist, direct, and structural violence of the USA.
Yeah, thank you. I think you nailed it. Let me share my screen here. Okay. These things in the way. Awesome. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, everything, it's okay.
Nice. All right, so thank you for that. We'll be talking about our research project that we did that we titled Rest Here Now. So for the presentation, we'll start with kind of giving a background to the context of the study, looking at kind of contextualizing structural violence in our case of Black Americans. Then we'll identify our research problem, talk a little bit about our methods, presenting the analysis, and then we'll kind of give a conclusion and kind of raise the tensions that we have with drawing conclusions in such a work. So to talk about the background of it, we were drawing on a body of scholarship that's referred to as the Black Horizon. So the Black Horizon is kind of an approach towards understanding the world that centers anti-Blackness as foundational to life in the modern world. So we bring to the forefront the histories of, sorry, was somebody saying something?
No, just continue.
So we bring to the forefront then the histories of chattel slavery and conquest. So we're really taking seriously the way that the modern world has been shaped by anti-Black violence. And as a political project, the Black Horizon seeks to reveal this violence and disavow it. So we're also kind of building on Black feminist approaches to turn this recognition of anti-Black violence into something that can be generative as well. And that's what we did with our project. And we have here one really iconic photo from Black Lives Matter protests called Taking a Stand in Baton Rouge. And then there on the left side of the screen, it should be where the Aisha Evans is being approached by the two men. And then on the other side, there's a kind of a lesser known, I didn't see this one covered as much during all of the coverage of her being taken away. And so this was kind of to contextualize a little bit the structural and direct violence within the US, which I think maybe everybody is sadly very familiar with internationally, especially with the recent re-election of Donald Trump. And from these photos, I thought it was really interesting that this was actually her first time ever going to a protest. And this was also the photographer's first time ever going to a protest. So I thought it was a really nice reminder for all of us here when we're seeking to kind of tackle structural violence in our lives, that it's never too late to start. And your first time can be a really big one, or you can have a long career of doing it. But so I thought that was a little bit nice to see. Um, and maybe another important insight from the Black Horizon is that when we're talking about anti-Blackness, we are talking about it within the context of racism, but also as kind of a wider logic that structures the world into hierarchies and separations and segments. And these separations and hierarchies are arbitrary. So there really is no base for them, but they continue to be entrenched through, yeah, the continual reformation of social political institutions. And so this led us to ask the question, how do Black Americans use their Blackness and their bodies to understand and challenge the violence they face in the US, both historically and present? And then while answering that question, we actually kind of come to a research problem. So we don't seek to answer that question specifically, but that led us to look at efforts to address this anti-Black violence in the USA. So we kind of decided to break it into two different forms. So we have previous Black liberation efforts, as you can see here, like Martin Luther King civil rights movement, but also the Black Panthers. So there are kind of these histories in the US of so-called nonviolent protest and also kind of more militant protest, which was also sometimes nonviolent. But they're premised on notions of development, reparations, and reform. So I think, as we just talked about with abolition feminism, it's quite interesting to think along. Can the system be reformed? Do we have to continue to just improve the system and eventually we will have a nonviolent system? Should we continue to buy into these notions or do we need to look at something else entirely? Um, and from this, we were drawing on the scholarship of Black feminists who shared the insight as Black women within the Black liberation movement that by and large, previous efforts of the liberation movement didn't seek to challenge patriarchal notions within it. So they still maintained the hierarchy, but it was then along gender lines rather than racial lines, and then seeking to elevate the status of Black Americans to be the same as white Americans without kind of challenging the notion that there should be a hierarchy in the first place or the wider societal structures that allowed for there to be a hierarchy in the first place, and instead seek to just kind of develop past them or reform them. And then outside of these, there are also kind of Black Horizon efforts they're referred to as. And so these are the practices of fugitivity, maroonage, and repair. And so this is very interesting to look at, and it's kind of not talked about as much, I think. But there is a really rich history of formerly enslaved persons, also indigenous persons, also lower socioeconomic persons who just kind of left society during, yeah, slavery, and they formed peripheral societies outside of it. So they didn't seek to participate in the so-called like polite political society. They just did their own thing and they went outside of that and found their form of repair there. And so then this draws to attention kind of also practices of enslaved persons who would steal away their time. And so they would leave the plantation unauthorized, which is, of course, something that could be done with the threat of death. But to go and have a party in the woods and then the next morning be hungover and unable to work at the expectations that were set by the plantation owner. And so when we look at these practices, they're very interesting because they don't seek to be political because they're not participating in the system. They, of course, exist at the same time if we're going to look at it in a very real way, but they're not participating in it. And so from this, we also looked at kind of notions of pleasure, embodiment, and rest. And so that brings us to the two images on the right from the Nap Ministry. So the Nap Ministry was founded by Tricia Hersey as she does art exhibitions, she does workshops. So you can see there one of the photos of the workshops, but taking naps as a means of reparations and political resistance. So to reclaim the labor that has been stolen from Black Americans and from their ancestors to profit the US by just napping. And so she discovered this through her own life of feeling exhausted. And so then there was one excerpt where she was writing that she was on the way home from the bus and she was just falling asleep and how that was such a nice thing that she could do for herself to allow herself to nap and to not be listening to a podcast on the bus, to not be making a grocery list, to not be answering emails and things like this. So this is then what brings us to our research question, and specifically the part that's in bold there. How do they see possibilities of envisioning, experiencing, and pursuing reparations and racial justice through practices of rest? In particular, how do Black women living in the USA engage in rest as a mode of repair? So we wanted to look at the way that rest uh, kind of can be one of these peripheral, outside the system, maroonage practices. And to do this, so we used a differentiated methodology, which I won't get so into here. I'll talk more about the data collection events, but we used conversation and rest as a methods. So the findings that we'll bring to you will be from our own experiences of talking with people about this, as well as doing them ourselves. So we drew inspiration from the slow scholarship movement. And we had home studio discussions at first, and then that led to the organization of a community art event, which you can see on the photo there was a live painting that was done of it. So we centered around women pole dancing. And so as you can kind of see the start of the shape of pole dancers there with the words "Picture Me Resting," and an embodiment workshop. And so I think I forgot to say, but Shamika and Slink are both here. So maybe one of them can share some of the other photos from the event if anybody's interested in looking at that later. So then to bring us to the analysis, trying to keep up with time, we have a three-part analysis. So we kind of just discerned all of our conversations into three main things. So first, taking it easy isn't easy. And so it sounds very nice and easy to say, oh, I'm going to nap and then that'll be enough and I will be doing these crazy things outside the system, dismantling the system, identify. But it isn't that easy and it is a lot of work. And so our participants, when we were talking about it, shared there's a lot of internalized guilt around taking a break, about being non-productive and fears of it. So it takes really a lot of intentional, mindful work to be able to get yourself into a place where you can do these restorative practices, these reparative practices. But it also isn't work. And so it doesn't exist in the same continuum of that you really have to put in hard work and you'll get there eventually. It's kind of a different mode entirely. So we need to think of it in a Black Horizon perspective of not sustaining the system, not seeking to participate in the system, but to reconnect with yourself. And so then that kind of leads us into the second point of resting in a different body, which is my body. And so then it was a process of kind of recovering who you are, what your interests are, what you like to do, what your preferred mode of rest would be. So we looked at embodiment and creative expression, but of course, there's so many other possibilities to engage in this. And this is also what the Nat Ministry brings up too, that she came through it, she came to it through the form of naps, but there's other practices of it that are available and accessible to people to participate in. Um, yeah, so we highlighted then the role of creative expression in it, which brings us to the third point for rest here now together. So it is, of course, a solitary endeavor, and it's up to you to initiate from yourself, but it's never done entirely in isolation. So we were able to kind of discuss the way that you need to do it yourself, but it's so much easier and it's so much better and so much fuller of an experience when you do it with other people and when you can share that experience with them as well and learn from their practices and also kind of do it together. So this brings up the tension of rest here now as the activity, the place, and the temporality of it. So it is a constant practice that you can do however you want to do for resting. And it needs to be here, which is situated in your body, and now. So it's constantly being reformed. So what was feeling good for you at this stage of your life, maybe you slowly learn that you like something else different, and you have to be open to the possibility of change. And through these kind of threefold thing, we see that it's done together. So it's never going to be done entirely in isolation. Um, yeah, I think this brings everything for the analysis. And then to bring up kind of the tensions around this. So we have three findings: embodiment as political activism and disavowing the anti-Black world. So this already brings up the tension for the Nat Ministry having the slogan of rest as reparations, rest as a form of resistance, as political expression. And it is that, but it also isn't political expression at all. It is something so much more than just kind of seeking to push back and reform the system and say, okay, we need to have space to rest. So Audre Lorde is exactly correct to say that it is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. But it's also something much more interesting and beautiful and generative outside of reforming the system. We came to the idea of kind of taking it easy as a mode to reveal and challenge this anti-Black violence and to refuse to participate in it, both on an internal level and also within the community. So this means that when we were talking about rest, we were saying how it does identify racial capitalism in the US, but it also is really life affirming and it feels good and it creates something more than just a critique. So it does identify all of these very critical and pertinent points of identifying anti-Blackness, but it also kind of goes towards something else. And that's something else we're still kind of seeing what it is exactly. And so then for recommendations that we thought maybe are relevant for people who are joining us in the audience today, is to also take it easy and to get creative with your own research on structural violence. And I think that we see from the summer school, this is already happening elsewhere. So it's really cool to see. And so we can all kind of explore further ways to eschew this anti-Blackness and to think about, okay, uh, some people are really into pole dancing, some people are really into naps, some people are really into poetry, and figure out what it would be for yourself, and to think about how you can rest yourself and kind of disconnect from this way, and to kind of reconnect and find what your real interests are when you're not worried about being productive or fueling the system. And then, of course, the limitations from it. Anti-Blackness is not yet undone from this, so we also need to take it a little bit easy. So this was brought up in the review process, I think, for the article for all these tensions are still here, and we've identified them, and we're saying that we're doing something else, but all the tension is still there. And so I think that's also maybe kind of emblematic of the persistence of structural violence, and that you can say identify it, refuse it, but it's still there. Um, and so we can't really say that this is the way forward, this is something everybody needs to do, but we're saying that this is part of the blueprint for it and needs to be taken seriously. And so it's kind of also still similar to rest as an activity that unfolds throughout your life. It's also still a research finding that is unfolding as well. So it's kind of a, yeah, perpetual work in progress in this way. I think I did it right into 15 minutes. So we
Yeah.
have some of the selected references that went with the paper there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Um, now we can open discussion. I think it was very inspiring. So, do you have some comment or questions? I would not like to start with myself, but if you have something to comment, please.
I will be brave. Thank you, everybody. I wanted to direct a question to you because I've lived in Athens from 2018 to 2020. And I was just discussing this earlier with somebody about how before I went there, I obviously wasn't up to date with how the situation in Greece or specifically in Athens is with regards to being, for example, a single woman, middle-aged woman coming to Greece. It really hit me like a brick wall that it wasn't what I expected it to be, like a more welcoming, warm environment. It was much more like leaning towards patriarchy, and I feel what I've gathered from my time there is that the more women self-organized to protect themselves from whatever the attacks may be against them, the more the opposition it was like a process that the more you show that you're there is a community, then the more the targeting persists. I just thought maybe you could comment on this. I'm a Moroccan, I'm a communicologist, and yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the reason that abolition feminism appeals to me so much is because it helps us understand that we are all functioning within a system that is harming all of us. So if we take, for example, what happened to the people that they were actually from Greece, some of the people that were attacked in Novi Sad with neo-Nazis. And when we sat down to talk about it, to sort of break it down, like you have somebody that's coming to your country for the first time, trans man that's never been attacked anywhere, is now being attacked here. And I invited him to, be part of the school. And there's this assumption that, whoever comes will be safe, or, otherwise we wouldn't be inviting all these people. But I'm getting off topic. The point being is that when we sat down to talk about it, we started to deconstruct why this violence is coming this way towards, people that were living authentically their lives, being happy and afar. Why is this a threat to these neo-Nazis, right? And also thinking about how someone becomes, because these are children. They're like, to me, they're children. I mean, I'm not super old, but to me now, a 20-year-old is a child. So how does what happens in the life of an individual to result in them needing to sort of be threatened by the happiness of others, the authentic living of others, and also really finding no other alternative in their life for, authentically living. I mean, I don't think that anyone genuinely finds happiness in neo-Nazism or hooliganism, whatever. I think the point being is that what abolition feminism shows us is that we need to build coalitions, and that coalitions are uncomfortable. So I need to be, although it seems incredibly counterintuitive, that I need to be in coalition with somebody that's, a rapist, a neo-Nazi, etc. What we have to realize is that we are all the product of structural violence that is the result of neoliberalism, etc., patriarchy, etc. We need to redirect the target of the violence, or not that we need to be violent, but I'm saying we need to redirect our understandings of who are not enemies, but people who we are in opposition with, right? So I think that that's, for example, something that we're being taught by students now, and also some of what you are saying is that, why is there this need to say, like, we're not political? At first, when I heard them saying, like, we're not political, or, these demands that we're making are, not political demands, we want institutions to work, etc. At first, I thought that this was sort of like if we strengthen neoliberal institutions, we're strengthening all of this negative stuff that comes with the neoliberal institutions. But I think really what they're saying is that we need to take our understanding of what is political, of what is contentious, out of the equation, and learn to build coalitions with people that seem to be politically opposed to us, but are actually victims of the same things that we are victims of. So now I'm starting to go in a loop, but I think I've made my point, is that I think this is what abolition feminism shows us, that we are all part of the system. So somebody that's in prison for whatever, like, for example, the example that I gave, a woman is, abused in a domestic situation, ends up in prison, right? But meanwhile, I, as a feminist, am making appeals for, a stronger prison system. It doesn't make sense, yeah.
Then I have a question for Alexander and Shamika. First is, I would like to say my impression on certain things. First, I think that the body becomes something very important in contemporary politics. It becomes something very directly involved in important events and in important changes. For example, now at this moment in Serbia, we have a very strong movement and protest of students, and more people, wider people from Serbia, who block squares, institutions with their body, asking for some very important changes related to corruption in Serbia. So it means for me that body becomes something directly involved and something which is global metaphor for what is important, because you can't transfer your body to somewhere else. So it is about something which is here and you can't overstep it. And this is actually the requirement of students, for example, in Serbia. They don't want to step, they give their body and they don't want to make anything else. So what I actually want to ask and to comment is about what actually is so radical about students' protest in Serbia. They influenced many people to start self-restructuring of themselves. Many people changed during past months in Serbia. It is something about inner changes more than about the outer changes. So I'm interested about your movement, REST. Actually, my impression is that resting means giving space for yourself, and it is the form also of restructuring. So I would like to ask you, how do you explain the impact of this resting? What is the impact of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think it can go on for a long time. And I don't know, Slink, if you enjoy to jump on, you're more than welcome to give an answer to it too, because I think you have a really cool perspective on it. But I think that if you just think about the way that if you think, am I relaxed right now? Where am I carrying tension in my body? Already just starting with this, you can relieve and say, oh, I could be a little bit more comfortable. I could be a little bit more comfortable. And that's something that you are allowed to do. You don't have to fight to deserve. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to carry tension for the sake of carrying tension. You can do it right now, and you can do it in your own body. And so I think that through our conversations in the workshop that we did, it was also interesting to see how it creates a different space. It creates a different place for us to have an interaction. And of course, while doing the dancing workshop, I felt different in my body. And then, so we started the workshop first by saying, what do our bodies feel like doing? And so we all kind of came to the collective thing that it would be fun to start with kind of the dancing. And so we did moving around the art space that we were in. And then we had a conversation. And so I think that was maybe a perfect example for what does rest do. It opened us all up to our connection with each other and also being able to bring, like, what do I actually want to bring to this conversation? I feel grounded, I feel centered, I feel like I can participate and do justice to it. Um, I hope that answers it. Maybe Slink likes to jump in. I see she's on video now.
Yeah, I don't want to put all the pressure on you, but hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to be here. I'm saying hello from Cincinnati, Ohio. Um, yes, so the question was, what is the impact of rest? And I think that's what's so wonderful. It's about rest is, and the way we're engaging with it really is, um, we're positioning rest as, something super radical, which it's only radical because of the capitalistic, fascist society we live under, like on a global level, with patriarchy everywhere. Um, but in fact, rest is like a foundation of humans and of nature, and it's something that as a child you're very much um, told to do. It's like, okay, yep, you're acting crazy, time to go take a nap, and it's part of your life, but then you hit middle school and they think you just don't need that anymore. And so then you forget how to human, you forget how to be in the natural world, and then you start rationalizing things like going to work sick, and then we have something like a global pandemic. And it just becomes you know, a small fracture that compounds and compounds until now you need like 3 knee replacements. I think when we talk about the impact of rest, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it permeates everything. And if we actually, you know, lived in our bodies and and acknowledged that we are human first and that we are a biological being, I'm just not sure we would have made half of the decisions that got us to where we are. If we look at history from a global level, a lot of the decisions that you know, have set our government the way that it is, we made decisions thinking that we were divine beings far outside of the impact of nature or even needing to be beholden to the laws of nature. In fact, we thought we could manipulate them or just completely ignore them. I don't mean to like go into like spirituality practices or maybe demonize anyone's beliefs. That's not at all what I mean to imply. I just mean like if the harm started by us deluding ourselves into thinking that we were just somehow not a part of this natural cycle anymore, then to me, it just makes sense that we would begin by just trying to remember our actual place in the world. We would begin by getting proper sleep. We would begin by making sure we were fed and fed well. Um, I feel like nutrition is less garbage outside of the States in my experience. But still, food scarcity and food security is a feminist issue, is an abolitionist issue, the same as carceration, the same as state violence, the same as gender rights. All of these things are connected. So all of these things go back to the body. And so for us, it just felt natural to begin this work with our bodies. And I can say, at least for me, the personal impact has been I've been able to actually give my wounds and my brainwashing the space that they deserve to be like acknowledged so that I could really so that we don't continue to like gaslight ourselves into thinking we have found a solution or to like rush a process that is going to take a long time to untangle. And rest gives us not just a space to breathe, but it gives us a space to grieve, to cry, to release, also to be angry, and to do something with these emotions that doesn't involve harming ourselves or others. And so in that, we get to be more creative with what our solutions look like because we've actually spent time with the harm that we are feeling. So I don't know if that was a very measurable answer, but thank you.
It was very clear and I like it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any other questions or we are going to rest? Yes.
If I may, I just I'm into making slogans and kind of wrapping up with something. So while you were speaking, Slink, I thought of something called rest is resistance. It sounds like a great wrap up, and further on, rest is radical resistance to structural violence. So for me, that would be like the greatest takeout from this last panel, so to speak. Thank you.
Yes, and I would like to add that what I really like about this, and you don't know, but this is the atmosphere at the moment here in Serbia. It is like infection. It goes all around, you know, if you really rest, people around you wish to rest. If you're creative, people around wish to be creative. So I think, actually, I really think that it is quite revolutionary. So thank you very much. if we do not have any other comments or questions, so I would like to thank you very much for this. Thank you all. And now we have only closing words, which Jelena will start.
Malo mi je teško i da zatvorim, zato ne volim završne riječi, zato što pogotovo nakon dugih skupova, jer svakakve emocije prođu u ova 2 dana, ali htjela sam da vam se zahvalim što ste bili, htjela sam da vam se zahvalim što su nam diskusije bile jako, ne samo interesantne, zato što mislim da to uopšte neće izraziti koliko su bile plodotvorne zapravo, mada je verovatno i to što su interesantne dovoljno dobro samo po sebi. Pošto je pre sada već 5 ili 6 dana preminuo Michael Buravoj, sociolog od kog su generacije sociologa učile o javnoj sociologiji, o angažovanoj sociologiji, o tome koja je naša uloga u svetu oko nas kao društvenih naučnika. Možda bih u tom duhu voljela da razmišljanje o ovoj konferenciji nastavimo i kad se ona završi i da razmišljamo o tome kako u stvari možemo pomalo da mijenjamo svojim znanjima koje imamo svet oko sebe, zato što možda sam mi u ovoj cijeloj atmosferi koja oko nas vlada sa protestima još i više na tom stanovištu javne sociologije, da je, čini mi se, neću reći besmisleno, ali da u svakom slučaju baviti se društvenom naukom, a ne primjenjivati je van toga nekako nedovoljno. Tako da nam svima želim i da odmaramo, ali i da koristimo ovo svoje oruđe koje imamo i ovaj analitički aparat kad god možemo. Hvala.
I would just like to add, sorry, because our colleagues who are online couldn't follow that Jelena commented about sociology today here and the task, because I would like to say that here we have many really young sociologists. So I hope, which I am not, unfortunately. So I would like to advise them to combine these things, and I hope that we will make another conference soon. So thank you very much to all. Bye.